15 events going all around Singapore. I think we did well. So, okay, I'd like to welcome all of you to Select. My name is Dan Feng. I'm one of the owners of Select. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome the editor and the writers, some of the writers for Balik Kampung. And even during the launch at SWF, I already told Verena how I love the name Balik Kampung. Right? And truly, I think today is very apt because this, where we are now, is the book Kampung. For people who remember older version of Singapore, right? Diagonally across the road is the old MPH, which when people think about bookshops in Singapore, that's what they think of. Up the hill, just a stone's throw, is the old National Library. Further down the road is the Singapore Bible Bookshop. And where you are sitting now, this is the United Chinese Library, founded by Sun Yat-sen in 1910. So this really, you could arguably say that this is Singapore's book Kampung, book street. Right? And to have, but the Balik Kampung book come back to Balik Kampung, I think that's a good feeling. The other thing when I thought of when I saw Balik Kampung is how it's also a return to, I think, Gui is here, so I'm a little bit scared because he knows so much more than I do. But I think it's almost a return to a certain genre of writing, or how writing was in Singapore. If you were to look, this is something that we did when we moved here. We brought 600 books that we thought represented the publishing history of Singapore, and we hung a camera up on a warehouse and we took a picture. So this is about 200 of them. We cropped off part of it. But if you look at the book that's right behind Verena, it's called Jiao Feng's Banana Wind. That's the first ever Chinese literary magazine in Singapore. That's the first edition. And it's still going on now, but it's printed in Malaysia and with maybe a Malaysian readership. But in 1920-something, that was the first literary magazine. And again, these magazines flowered in those days, right? So with people contributing articles, very committed and talented editors working pro bono to put them together, and then distributing these literary magazines. And when I look at Balik Kampung, I mean, it's very inspiring because if you look at the collection of essays, I mean, the collection of pieces, it really cuts across. I mean, you have veteran writers, you have new writers, you have people writing about so many different things on this general theme, and it really is wonderful to read, and it made me think of those days. And I think that approach, I think, went on right with Tomasek and Singer and all that. More or less, I think it was a little bit of that. Collected shorter pieces on one theme, and then So I would really like to see that, actually I would rather say I believe that Balik Kampung will be as culturally significant as those titles that I mentioned. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Verena to start.
Thank you all for coming and joining us this afternoon. So, at the end of 2011, I proposed to Kenny Lake of Books Actually Stroke Math Paper Press that I have this idea about anthology that I would like to bring up, and I called it Balik Kampung. So the whole idea behind it is simply, alright. So today I invite you on a short excursion. Right. So there are 3 Balik Kampungs right now. And the whole idea behind the Balik Kampung series is each writer hopefully has, lived in a space in Singapore for at least 10 years. And I invite them to kind of write a creative response to those 10 years. So, why is this so? So many of, Singapore is always changing a lot, all the time, blah, 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 blah. And as a result, people keep moving. So to some degree, it is a very rare luxury for a lot of people just to stay put for 10 years. Yeah? But surely within that 10 years, you probably have formed some kind of tie, some kind of deep impression of the place you call home. And I thought that would always be the best way to get people to write. Whether they are established writers or not, they will be writing literally from the heart, because they lived and breathed there, in that space. Okay, so how did I select the stories? Very simple. The story, of course, must have a sense of a clear location, then a set of characters, functioning within that location, and then of course there's literary merit as well, and then but the whole thing is, it gives you hopefully evokes for you a sense, a flavor of the place and of the people. So that must come across very strongly. So these are the authors involved in the first Balik Kampung. So representing the first Balik Kampung is myself and we here. Yeah. And then we have Balik Kampung 2A. Joshua represents Balik Kampung 2A. And then Anne, she represents Balik Kampung 2B, and I also appear in Balik Kampung 2B. And Cyril is also, of course, behind, and he's both in Balik Kampung 2A and 2B. Okay, so this are things, basic stats here. So far, 28 stories, 26 featured authors, and also at the same time, possibly Balik Kampung 3 will come out next year. In a few weeks, I'll send out the commission call for Balik Kampung 3. So look out for that as well. Alright. Okay, so to give you a sense of how, the stories are broken down in terms of districts represented so far. This is how they are. In the Central District, there's Chinatown, Red Hill, River Valley, Dunner, Newton, Balestier, Whampoa, Battleview, and Owen Road have been written about. In the north, we have Yishun, Toa Payoh, right? Woodlands, Ang Mo Kio, Beauty World, Bukit Timah, Joshua. Right. Okay. In the west, we have Old Holland Road, Holland Clementi, Mount Sinai, Choa Chu Kang. Okay. And then Bedok, Changi, Hougang, Frankel, Marine Parade, and Upper Serangoon. Okay. So what I'm going to just talk about very briefly is to outline all the books in terms of relevant themes. Now, although I kind of use the examples here that I bring up typify that particular theme, but actually a lot of interlocking themes that reoccur in different ways or other in all the stories. Yeah. All right. So one very strong theme, of course, is the reaction towards landscape destruction and pace of change. So now, if you remember in the beginning, I had that excursion, like people going on an excursion. So that was in July this year. The Balik Kampung books were featured in a Balik Kampung tour that we did for the Heritage Festival. So that was one of the photos that we took. So in this particular photo right next to, the reason why there are two photos of Rosemary and is because she was part of that heritage tour, and it's very nice that she, her picture was right next to a tree, because her story is very much a reaction towards all this wanton, we grow trees and then one day they're all torn down. So her story is a reaction against a tree that was growing right outside her apartment, and one day it was gone. Yeah. Okay, Hougang, Robert Yeo, something to remember. So in this, if you read his autobiography, his memoirs, he talks very much about his growing up in this childhood home in Hougang. And to some degree, he kind of uses that material a little bit in this story. So it's this young man. He has gone away for further studies, has come back, and is told by his cousin, okay, last chance to see the old family home, because literally, it's been torn down. So if you want to just see the place before it's being built up, let's go and see it. So there's one scene in which he, his protagonist, looks at the old family home, but not only his old family home, but also his school, which has also been torn down. Okay. Now, other emotional, psychological responses to landscape change and pace of landscape changes. Shu Yin, she's one of the youngest writers so far that's been admitted to this collection, Now her protagonist is a Filipino maid that works for this family in Changi, and works for quite a number of years. Then goes back to Philippines and then returns to Singapore for holiday, and then she realizes, wow, there's so much change. Now, Shelley Bryant has written about Woodlands, and her protagonist is an Indian police officer. And this Indian police officer has lived in Woodlands for many years and has observed the changes in Woodlands. Now, I will hand it over to Joshua, all right, and he will share with you his perspective of Beauty World.
Alright. My story is called Peace is a Foot of Something Harder, and I find it a bit interesting to be in this theme, landscape construction, place of change, because my story is about a guy called Kok Seong walking around Upper Bukit Timah and trying to find somewhere peaceful to read his book. And my places of peace are a construction site, a McDonald's, and a foot massage parlour in that order. So not really your traditional old Singapore kind of places. I'll just read a bit to give you some kind of flavour. So at this point, Kok Seong has went to a McDonald's, but he's been disturbed by an old primary school friend, and he's trying to run away. Temporarily released, Kok Seong looked around wildly. He left his tray on Shashi's table and darted out the side exit while Shashi was still pumping a small middle-aged man's arm like the lever of a slot machine. Book in hand, Kok Seong dashed blindly into the godforsaken bowels of Beauty World Shopping Centre. All he wanted was a peaceful afternoon with his Dan Brown novel, a gentle walk around his quiet neighbourhood, while bookish academic Robert Langdon solved an historical conspiracy with clues hidden in centuries-old artworks. Perhaps one day he would sit down and write his own Dan Brown novel, The Beauty World Code, he would call it. Mild-mannered Ngee Polytechnic lecturer Lim Kok Seong, cracking the mysterious codes embedded in the decades-old architecture of ancient Bukit Timah shopping malls. Kok Seong licked his lips in excitement at the possibility. As he did, he realized his feet had instinctively brought him to a house of peace and comfort, a refuge from the hurly-burly and hustle-bustle, Yong Kang Foot Massage. The boss lady sashayed out in a patter of plastic slippers. Knowing her regular customer well, she ushered Kok Seong in with nary a word. Kok Seong beamed. Gentle yellow light, rows lining both walls of dingy beat-up chairs that surrendered to your weight the way only a chair of a certain vintage can. About 8, maybe 10 middle-aged Chinese men or women on stools, working their arcane arts, or watching the silent TV screens playing Channel 8 reruns of mid-90s serials. Yes, Kok Seong thought, perfect. He eased into an empty slot between two aunties, the chair giving in with a gentle sigh, and kicked off his flip-flops. A massage shifu, which is a non-gender specific term, this shifu was a thin, wiry auntie with raised veins crisscrossing her hands like MRT lines, materialized in front of him with a tub of steaming black liquid and grunted at him. Pleased at meeting a fellow non-verbal communicator, Kok Seong grunted back politely and immersed his feet in the warm herbs. After years of frequenting Yong Kang, he had narrowed down his impression of the list of ingredients in the foot bath to pipa, chuan bei, menthol, licorice root, pomelo peel, milkwood root, bitter apricot kernel, fresh ginger, and new water. He had always wondered if staff recycled the bath water, as the opacity of the solution always seemed to increase with the hour. After a few minutes of his herbal ruminations, the shifu reappeared and dried his feet with the ubiquitous good morning towels of all Chinese massage places and coffee shops. As the shifu swathed one foot in good morningness and went to work on the other, Kok Seong sighed and immersed himself in the world of Dan Brown. The warmth of the foot bath and the soothing pressure mixed with draughts of light pain from the foot massage had made him one drowsy browser. He had developed a routine for this too. One foot dedicated to reading usually left him nodding off, allowing him to enjoy the other foot in a semi-conscious dream state until he was jolted awake by the hammering fists that signaled the end of the foot massage. Clues, codes, hidden in the art, one leading to another, lines on a map of ancient Rome, or was it Florence or London or Washington? The plot lines of different books melded together in his hazy consciousness. In front of him, a reflexology chart of human foot. Everything is connected, isn't it? The big toe to the brain, the heel of the foot to the lower back, gallbladder, kidney, adrenal gland, all in the middle. The curve of the instep matching the curve of the spine. The shifu's intent face took on the aspect of Tom Hanks as Robert Langdon, exploring the clues, the lines of his foot to their natural conclusion. Kok Seong winced, a twinge of pain. A rough spot in his flip-flop had blistered the middle of his heel, his sciatic nerve apparently. A random walk is just another way of getting a full-body massage, he thought, looking at the chart. but only in the privacy of the massage parlour had he found peace today. Of course, the next customer was just a shoulder look away, and the lady was intimately rubbing his foot. But there was a social contract there, an unspoken rule, not the kind founded on economic subjugation or class or status. The shifu would never breach the privacy of a customer, not beyond the initial N check. Unlike barbers or taxi drivers who felt obliged to play the social maven, the shifus of Yongkang foot massage went about their work without unnecessary chatter. Would the baker strike up a conversation with a slab of dough? Hell, they didn't even look at their customers. Their eyes were always on conveniently subtitled TV screens, their only entertainment in a fruitful workday. Far from being a distraction, the TV screen served to remove extraneous sense of sight from the massage equation. Reflexology was the operation of the fingers, rigidity and resistance sensed by touch, the give and uptake of the flesh. What did the eyes do when the fingers did the walking? Or the brain even? The motion of the hands became automatic, like collision avoidance, familiar territory. Despite a dozen feet passing through the hands each day, the map remained the same. Here, at the side of the big toe, the pineal and the pituitary glands. The higher outstep, the arm, the lower outstep, the knee and the leg. Robert Langdon and the Mona Lisa, the West Wind, Dante's Inferno, the same. One foot after another.
So you should read that story, get the whole story, because it is one big fun satire. And yeah. Okay, so also at the same time we have memories of landscape. And to typify it all, well, let's talk about Chet's story here. So Mount Sinai wasn't as built up, say, 30 years ago. And Chet wrote about that time, and in his story it's about a gang of boys who try to protect a bush in Mount Sinai, which was the source of all that super duper Viet Cong fighting spiders. Yeah. So he and another street the Pai Kia gang, trying to protect territory. So it's very interesting. So Sunny Lim wrote about a place in which he grew up in, 65 Eden Grove, and it's a very touching story about a young boy waiting for his father to pick him up, but at the same time he's like going in and out of home and waiting and observing all these things that happened in this neighborhood in the 1950s. And then we wrote about this story, Grandfather's Aquarium, which is based, I believe, on his grandmother and his mother. So his grandmother used to live in Yishun, and he grew up in Papaya. So there was a lot of commute for your grandmother between homes.
The story will not tell a lot about Papaya actually. It will tell a lot about my memories from Papaya about Yishun, which is now Yishun in many ways. One of the reviews that came out about this book cited mine as not a story, more a kind of memory of past autobiographical in many ways, because I seem to have said that it was fiercely autobiographical. But if you have read enough of these autobiographies, you know that most of them are actually fictional in many ways, with the way you construct the past, because the past is lost. The past is made out of events, and the way we preserve them, unfortunately, as human beings, we like to leave them into stories. Okay, so for me, there really isn't a distinction. It's a story, and I try when I tell this story to try to make it as clear as possible that there's a lot of fictional elements. I'm trying to reclaim, I'm trying to put together what I could remember of a past that I'm very sure is lost in many ways. The story is called Grandfather Aquarium, although my grandfather doesn't feature until the last paragraph, and he doesn't feature in person because he passed away when I was very young. And yet he is in the story without being in the story. It is mostly a story about my grandmother and my mother as you rightly pointed out. In fact, to a point when Verena was originally editing the book, she asked me, do I want to change the title because my grandfather isn't in the story? I said, no, that's the hook. I'm letting it out too much already. That's the hook. You're going to read the story and you're going to wonder where on earth is the grandfather. And then by the time you reach the end, it should be clear to you that my grandfather has always been in the story. without being there when I grew up. I want to read actually the opening part of this story. The whole story is told backwards from the moment my grandmother's passing away to the time when I could remember my grandmother. I can no longer remember the year or the day, but I sometimes still dream of the hour when news of my grandmother's death was entered my home. The afternoon, like a few other afternoons scattered across my younger days, it was very warm. I would be drowning in half sleep on mother's bed, a book thrown unraveled by my side. In that age, before the advent of mobile phones, the light grey Telecom's phone sitting on top of 3 volumes of yellow pages on a side table in the living room rang a great deal. You would often be one of mother's sisters, and what followed salutations would be the semi-melodic movement of mother's voice as she spun or reaffirmed gossips, filling the space of a domestic hours. But that time was unusual. The handset clicked back in place within seconds, and as I roused my mind to question the rashness, there was a low-pitched roar, one I did not hear before nor have since heard again. It was unwovenly, even inhuman, off-tune and steady, but loud, like the aching groan of an old machine. By the time I came startled to the door, I caught sight of its end, mother raising her face from her deep arms, cupping tears. She swept clean her eyes with one brush of her arm, and with sudden singleness of purpose, had a new face on. She dug out a small black notebook, pulled off its rubber band, and began punching the plastic phone buttons. With her back turned to me, the words fell into a chew. Grandmother is dead. For years before she passed away, grandmother had been a much diminished figure. It was not just the natural, though still painful fact that she was bent double, smaller, weaker, the hump in the back more grotesquely round, reshaping my memory forever. She was also in a way wearing a larger body. It now seemed perfectly within reason to contain a spirit, imprisoning her every flight of mind. This emptiness between grandmother and her body was as pronounced as a space in a cage. And each year when we visited her in little uncle's 5-room flat in Yishun, she looked smaller, she looked emptier and emptier. Sometimes, something would greet us, a whisper of the woman a child had tried to frame with the name grandmother. Her voice, a sing-song shrill, every bit touched by sweetness, seemed to have issued from a deeper place. It felt further, remote, as the sound of stars as they made their nightly fires. We greeted her in her kitchen chair, or smiled to her as she lay mumbling on the hard bed. She liked her bed hard as the floor. The people from her generation mostly did. She would come to the door when she heard us knock, years before she stopped crying altogether. Grandmother ended her visit to us at Toa Payoh when travel became an annoyance, then a menace. The spaces were opening up within herself, between Toa Payoh, where I live, and Yishun, and most of all between Yishun, where she spent her last years, and Nee Soon, the heart of a brighter, greater part of her life, the village that disappeared within months when the cranes came. The changes brought with them other changes, grandmother and mother, 2 women severed by progress, who only understood the inside of home, and to whom the television fed images of a terrifying broken world outside, became strangely bonded. Over the telephone, mother and daughter talked for hours about every bit of sister's life and mine, and about trivial happenings in father's side of the family. They magically strung together all these elements in an hour's chat, with metaphors and subplots drawn from the then current TV series they were following. Grandmother would call in the hours before noon, before mother needed to make meals for her children, soon to be home from school. The phone voice was the chirp of mother's only window to the world. Our real windows were regularly shut for fear that something savage might find its way in, destroy our idyllic preserve. The safety regulations HDB issued required metal windows to be double grilled and locked, made a further virtue out of this impenetrability. You see, the last stronghold of the kampongs was in these HDB flats. Grandmother and mother were custodians, keeping alive rural kindness and simplicity, two of many thousands strewn across our tiny, rapidly modernizing country. The kampong does not die in the soil. It dissipated, withered away in the sunlessness of modernity. The sharp grids of order that is met in the sky.
So, obviously we have also memories of people as well. So, Dora Tan wrote about her growing up in Red Hill, and her story is about a mother and 6 children. And so you see this perspective of Red Hill from these 7 people. And it's like some people love Red Hill, some people hated Red Hill. And during the July Heritage Tour, so that's Dora, showing people the flat that she used to live in Red Hill. Now, Verena Tay has captured Chinatown, memories of Chinatown, in this story called The Tontine Leader, which is kind of based on her mother, who used to run tontines to supplement her income. And you give a very intimate insight to how people used to live, right, in Chinatown, and how they needed to scrabble around for money. Now, some writers have pushed the boundary a lot, and they have identified the characters with a space. So, Gemma has wrote about her grandmother, and she identifies her grandmother so much with this flat in Owen Road that it seems like the flat is like, the lifeblood of her mother, her grandmother, is in the very walls of the flat. Now, Mark has taken a very interesting view under the bridge. What does that evoke for you? What lives under the bridge?
Trolls.
Yeah. So he has written about a troll who lives in Ang Mo Kio. Right? So how did this troll come about? One has to find out. Alright, so obviously we talk a lot about the past a lot, and therefore the contrast between what you actually remember and what was real. Kai Chai's version of Changi is based on his childhood roaming around Changi village area, running wild, but it's written from a perspective of a museum curator who in his old age is kind of looking nostalgically back into Changi of the 70s, and he creates this that diorama out of his own expense and puts it in the museum. But after that happens, strange things start happening in the museum. Now, Shu Hong has written about Old Holland Road, and his story is kind of based off this murder that happened in the 1980s of Winnie. It was a very famous murder, but his own story isn't really based on that one, but purportedly a more recent murder in the last few years. Okay, Sharon has written about Frankel Estate. Her character is this housewife who finds who has her problems with being a housewife right now, the reduction in status, etc. But so one of the things that this housewife likes to do is to go back to Frankel Estate. She still lives at Frankel, but there's a very famous Golo Mi store. So this is Sharon. She insisted that she share this picture with us because it's her eating the Golo Mi, her favorite Golo Mi. Yeah. All right. So obviously, there are stories about transition to HDB living. So Red Hill is 7 Views of Red Hill and Greece Story come under that category. But at the same time, there's also issues of downgrading as well. So when I brought people on the heritage tour. So the back of the house, the one with the white slats, you know, that used to be my home, at least the back of it, right? And the reason why I showed that view is, now you can't see it very good view in this angle, but you can see the windows above the windows above here, right? So those used to be that window. I used to live in the bedroom behind of the house, and I would look out on this, you know, the back of the house. Is all this area with all the old black and white bungalows are, and so it's very nice and wooded and all that. So my story, Floral Mile, kind of based on my experience of living there, but also adds the perspective of my mother, my father, my uncle, my aunt. So it's about a man who has lived in this particular terrace house for many years, and finally has to really decide to sell the house away because one, bills are running up and he doesn't have the money, so he needs to, you know, sell to get the money to pay for medical bills. But also at the same time, he and his wife cannot cope with the home anymore. Him, because of arthritis, so he finds it going up and down the stairs, and his wife is having like some kind of dementia kind of problem, and it's hard to kind of look after her with 2 levels in the house. Alright, so Sui San has written about another family who left Bukit Timah to move into Balestier, and so it was a big culture shock for them to move to Balestier. Alright, so sometimes some of the writers have written about strange things that they have encountered. So I don't know if any one of you realized that on Marine Parade, one of the big HDB blocks there is actually a lighthouse. So Yume has written about that, and Alex has written about this. You know, there's a stretch of Holland Road right before you get to the botanical gardens that seems to be very wooded. So he wrote about that area, about seeing, one day, realizing, jogging past, and there's a kampong there, and there's a chicken, there's a rooster right in the middle of Holland Road. Why is this? So he wrote about that mystery. Okay. Now, because of all the moving and all the changes that have arisen, obviously some people feel very alienated. And Zizi's story is based on a group of young, educated Malays and hanging out and really having a lot of existential conversations. Cyril has written about growing up in Bedok and the sense of alienation that he feels living in that family that he grew up, his character grows up in, and thinking back and relating and trying to understand his growing up years. Desmond has written, but this is the most team story that I've edited so far because I had to include it because it's incredible in its imagery. It's apocalyptic fiction set in Balestier Whampoa. And it's got all these angels and angelic figures all around and hanging about Balestier Whampoa. Gee, wow. Okay. Now, Tanya has didn't have a very positive growing up experience, so her relationship with Ang Mo Kio is kind of bittersweet. So her character is a young woman who decides one day that really life is so bitter that she doesn't want her little baby to grow up in this horrible world, and the character drops the baby out of the 25th story window. Cyril sent in 2 stories for Balik Kampung 2, and I like them both, that's why they're both in 2A and 2B. And this one is about a boy whose mother shoplifts, and he witnesses that kid witnesses the shoplifting incident. Alright, Lynn has written about a little girl. Lynn is Malay, so she's written about a young girl who who's about 5 and who is being looked after by a nanny while her mother works, and that young mother doesn't really like the child, and it culminates to the point where there's a physical abuse and the child is hospitalized. But at the same time, all that alienation, etc., there are also stories where characters are searching for some soul in the environment that they live in. So Wei-Fen's story is all about this character who is very discomforted when his wife becomes very ill, and he doesn't know what to do. And so he goes about all the religious buildings around in the River Valley area, trying to search for solutions for all this discomfort that he's feeling. And I will now hand Anne the floor to share her story.
I'll just say a little bit about my connection to Chua Chu Kang first, and then I'll read a couple of extracts from her story. So I've lived in Chua Chu Kang for 11 years, and it's always felt like a neighborhood that is not built up. So it's always on the fringes of things. Across the road is an army training ground, and sometimes at night you can smell the sea, and every now and then there'll be animals invading our house because we live on the fringes. So there was a day where actually 2 macaques actually came and they just jumped in. Mind you, this is an HDB estate. It's not some like atas, some atas house. Yeah, so we walked out of the kitchen one day. It's all like dark shapes scampering around trying to eat stuff from the dining table. So yeah, Chua Chu Kang is really on the fringes, and the neighborhood has evolved through the years as I've grown up with it. So it's become more built up, but it's still on the fringes. So I guess about 6 years ago, we used to look in the forest and see like little fires in the night because, you know, foreign workers would be camping out there. So it always felt as if we're not quite in Singapore. So my story is about this man. He's called Singh, and he doesn't have a job. And the reason why I wrote this story is I wanted to imagine what this neighborhood is like in the daytime when I'm not around. So I'll read a little bit of it, and then I'll read a second extract because Chua Chu Kang actually sits in World War II like hot zone. It's actually part of the Jurong Kranji defense line. So it's actually where the Japanese troops kind of invaded through, and some of the main artery roads are where they came from in the past. So the story kind of goes back in time a little bit. So I'll read the beginning. Sleep was a monster he was trying to outrun. It smelled like unwashed bed sheets, like the stench of damp beige paper files he had to shred before the office closed. Singh couldn't wake up, though the bright morning sun was red through his eyelids. He couldn't move his arms or his feet, and sleep held his throat against the pillow dampened with a spit. Jamie, he screamed for his wife, then for his 2 daughters. A girl! Mei Mei! No one came. Of course he had not uttered a word, so paralyzed were his tongue and face. From the heat on his outstretched arm, he knew that it was past 10, and that the patch of sunlight that fell full on his feet at 9 was now creeping up his arm. His wife would be at NTUC starting her shift as a cashier. Aga and Mei Mei in their chalky Monday shoes would have been at Concord Primary School even earlier, singing the national anthem at 7:35 a.m. The only sounds he could hear were the high drizzle of distant traffic on the Kranji Expressway and someone spitting downstairs. So lazy, he seemed to hear Jamie say. What sort of man wouldn't go out and find a job? Singh tried to lift his chin and open his eyes. He did. His head felt heavy, and the air smelled like water of a farm pond, algae green and thickish. Jamie stood there, her arms folded, wearing her beige flowered uniform. How could it be, he thought? Was she late for work? You want to lie there all day, or you want to come up with me and see got any jobs? I'm trying, you know. You think every day I don't try to get up? Yesterday you didn't go. The day before you also never go. She turned and walked out of the room. I'm going to go now. Tomorrow I will start work at a new place. You wait and see. He sat up. He was walking, but the effort of standing made him sit down. Useless, he heard her yell from the hall. But in fact, Singh hadn't moved. He felt the sun on his shoulder and sleep strangling him. He could still breathe. That at least he could do. From the back of his mind, somewhere in that cool gelatinous spot behind his eyelids, he could feel his eyes move. He moved his right hand, tried to make it fall off the bed where it rested. He was wrong. It was still pinned under his body. He slapped himself with his left hand. He did not. Then he found he could see the bright curtains swelling and falling gently. Singh felt his jaw, then sat up slowly, facing the window. The neighborhood was quiet and depopulated. There was never anyone around at 10 in the morning unless it was someone old or sick or out of a job. His heart beat slowly, slower than the long rhythmic whine of cicadas in the trees outside their fifth-floor windows. If it stopped, he could stop breathing too. Then he could swim up into the high open spaces above the palm trees and float over the curve of Chua Chu Kang Avenue 4, down which he could hear bus 300 rumbling, then into the wild tangled green behind blocks 484 and 485, where sometimes he heard the void deck women say you could see mysterious fires waking through the trees at night. I'm going to read a second extract, and the original location of Chua Chu Kang as a village was at the junction of Old Chua Chu Kang Road and Sungai Jalan Hoya, which is actually now the present National Shooting Center. And I think the majority of the people have been to the army, so you all know what I'm talking about. It's the training area there. And I'm going to read a bit where he's actually gone to look for durians because he's heard about this lobang that he needs to get. And if he sells durians, he'll be rich. I don't advise you do that because you have to fight with all the uncles and aunties who actually have that as their laboratories. But I'll just read this. No, seriously, okay, don't go in. You will walk in and see people staring at you. It's just... Okay, just ahead of him, he could glimpse pale concrete through the shadows of the undergrowth. This is at night, by the way. But the building was oddly dark. It was low and squat, not the high-rise HDB blocks of Avenue 4. Singh stopped and goosebumps rose on his scalp. To his left, the grunt of live gunfire started up again, even closer than before. Somehow he must have taken a different trail. High above him, he heard the resonant hum of a surveillance plane, but he stopped himself from looking up into the trees. The jungle belonged to others, he remembered from his army days. As he walked forward, he noticed there were more huts than the ones he had glimpsed. Some were just broken remains of concrete foundations. Others were mostly intact with their roofs fallen in. Then as he emerged from the jungle, an entire housing estate lay before him, deserted but complete with playgrounds and shops that were now shuttered. Singh stood staring at Amar King in the moonlight. It was unnatural to see HDB blocks so dark and still, grey as a worker's uniform in the dimness. Some of the window panes on the second and third stories had fallen in, and ferns poked out of water pipes. He sniffed at the air. There was the whiff of sea and mangrove mud of brackish leafy matter trod in over the generations, and churned over by yield-tailed catfishes and vinegar crabs. An old prayer lantern still hung from the beam over the doorway. Where were the people, he wondered. He rubbed his eyes and then passed the hand over his face. Humanoid shapes were creeping out from beneath the furthest building, while others hung behind. Those closest to him dragged themselves sinuously and grotesquely along the ground. He felt his mouth yawning open in an attempt to scream, but his throat was paralyzed with horror. The cemeteries, he remembered, the war. From high above the jungle trees came a baritone moan, then a Pontianak screech that died away into a traffic warden's whistle. A fighter jet passed overhead. Gunfire began as the soldiers ran out from where they were hidden, shouting as they began a counter-strike. Someone threw a smoke bomb. They were army boys playing at war. Singh realized, almost crying from relief. Another F-16 flew overhead, wailing like a slaughtered pig. They were protecting this country. They were men. He turned, picking up his sack. Time to go home, time to find the trail again. Across the space in between him and the jungle, he saw more soldiers, but they drifted without touching the ground and wore the khaki uniforms of Australian troops. The war had never ended. Singh ran towards Amar King, straight into the arms of a white spectre with no face. Sleep held him by the throat and threw him down. So to find out what happened to him, as always the book. Yeah.
Okay, we're coming to the end. So the last theme to kind of talk about is because of all these changes that happen, people's memories are very short, and people forget what these places used to be like. So one of the historical pieces is, Mark's piece, because it starts from the 19th century into the present. All right. Now my two stories so far that I've written for the Balik Kampung series. Does anybody know where Floral Mile is? What area it is? what it means. Okay, you know this. You know the stretch of Dannon Road, right? Okay, after between Singapore Chinese Girls and ACS Barker Road, and you know there's that funny strip, like a parkland strip right next to the canal. Okay, now that strip is one last remnant of Floral Mile. So actually there used to be a whole entire stretch along that, by the canal, all the way from Kiam Hock Road down to Chan Shui Lane, and it was all lined with nurseries. So some of the nurseries that you see at Evans Road and at Thompson Road there, they used to be there. So the Floral Mile existed from the 60s until about the 90s, when the part of that stretch was kind of taken to broaden the canal so as to manage the floods, right? But that is Floral Mile. And then this one, I bet you nobody knows. Do you know where Wayang Satu is or what it refers to?
It's a flyover called Wayang Satu Flyover.
Thank you.
That's all I know.
Okay, so do you know which flyover that is?
It's People's Town Club.
Yeah.
It's there
Okay.
by
So so Bukit Timah Road, Dannon Road, right, and then you have the Whitley Roads and Whitley Road Junction. So that flyover there is called the Wayang Satu Flyover. Why is it called the Wayang Satu Flyover? What on earth is Wayang Satu? Right. So this is what my story is all about. Okay. So my story is Wayang Satu, 8 scenes of indifferent drama. In less than 4,000 words, I cover 200 years of Singapore history, from 1868 until 2068. So this is the first scene. So just now I introduced to you my character, which in Floral Mile. All right. So his name is Patrick Tan. Now, in Floral Mile, I capture him at the end of his stay in Gold Hill Gardens. So this is at the start of his stay in Gold Hill Gardens. Wayang Satu, 8 scenes of indifferent drama. 1968, wrong number at Gold Hill Gardens. The black phone rings. Little Thomas Tan jumps up. I'll get it. He drops his toy cars and scurries across the living room. No, commands his father Patrick from the dining table. I'll get it. The 7-year-old stops mid-run, disappointed. Patrick peels himself away from the Saturday paper and answers the call. Hello? Hello? Wayang Satu? Sorry, you've got the wrong number. Patrick barely puts the phone down when it rings again. He picks up the call. It is the same uneducated, glotalized voice of before that grates against his English teacher ears. Hello? Wayang Satu? No, I've told you already. Is this 52871? Yes. Your kedai Wayang Satu. This is 52871, but this isn't kedai Wayang Satu. Stop calling, please. Patrick nearly slams the handset down, irritated with this senseless disruption to his Saturday morning. Damn these nuisance calls. We've been here 3 months and they still keep coming. Because he senses Thomas watching him, Patrick, at the last moment, settles the receiver gently into its cradle. Thomas asks, "What's Wayang Satu, Dad?" "Wayang Satu is a place not far from here. That way," replies Patrick, gesturing vaguely towards the back of the house, corner of Stevens and Bukit Timah Road. Huh? I'll show you next time we drive past. Dad, if we are here and Wayang Satu's over there, why do people always call here? There's a shop or kedai at Wayang Satu near where the old police post used to be. I don't know why the calls to the shop sometimes end up in our house. I've complained to the telephone people so many times and still the problem isn't fixed yet. The phone rings once more. Patrick stares at the machine. What are the chances? Thomas gazes at him, expecting him to do the necessary. Reluctantly, Patrick answers. Hello? Good morning. Is this Wayang Satu grocery shop? The voice is new. Mission school educated Patrick recognizes the crisp tones of genuine received pronunciation. He hesitates. This is absurd. 3 wrong numbers in a row. He shakes his head and laughs silently to himself. Instead of screaming abuse down the phone, he plays along. Yes, this is Wayang Satu. Thomas widens his eyes in surprise. Interjection. But Dad! Patrick motions for Thomas to pipe down while he responds to the list of groceries being named over the phone with appropriate ahas, as if actually taking down the order. Finally, he ends the call. Yes, madam. Delivery to 14 Delvey Road by 2 p.m. Goodbye. The receiver is barely out of Patrick's hand when Thomas launches his protest thick and fast. Daddy, you lie! Why? You told me not to lie. And I know, son, but think of it this way, replied Patrick, grinning at his own genius. If the groceries are never delivered, the woman will get angry with the shop and stop calling to buy things. Then we can live in peace. The phone rings yet again. Alright, so you know where Stevens MRT station is being built right now? So many years ago, from like the late 1800s until about the 1960s, there was a police post there, right? And after when Singapore became independent, and I guess the police people, consolidated operations, reorganized themselves, that police post was, abandoned and closed. So after that, now if you look back in the papers in the archives, right, in the newspaper archives, periodically you see, okay, why is that being mentioned in the papers? Because crimes around the area would be reported at the police station. But after that police station was gone, slowly people just forgot the name, because one, its name was no longer reported in the newspapers, so nobody knew, have lost this sense of where it is. And the only thing that bears its name now is that little sign under the firewood that says Wayang Satu Flower. So one of the points of why I wrote the story is I just want to keep a sense of memory about what this place was, what these names were, what they meant to people. So at the end of the Heritage Tour, so at Bullet Books actually, we authors took this photo, and so right now, I hope you've enjoyed what we've had to share with you. So please, if you have any questions or thoughts that you would like to share, please.
As editor, in terms of content, structure,
for some stories there was really not much, just to polish up, a little bit here and there. For some stories, there needed to be some restructuring. Yeah.
and you work with the
Yeah.
writer.
Yes. So I did some. I proposed some changes, and then if I needed them to rewrite certain parts, I told them, okay, this needs fixing. So. Joshua is very competent in language. I really didn't work much on him, but I did suggest a bit on the long side, so I left him really much to delete what he thought was unnecessary.
This is a question for Joshua. So, in terms of your experience with that area, did you have to do more research before you sat down and wrote the story, or was it something that you just sat down and pumped out?
Sat down and pumped it out. I think in general, the criteria for this collection was you stay there for 10 years or more. So I guess your life is some independent research. But I think certain stories which I've said in more detail about the historical elements would have some more research. For me, it was just, this is my daily routine, going to my novels and massage.
Another question. What is it Wayang Satu? Which means one or the other?
In what little research I've done, I have not been able to really pin down why it's called. However, I do definitely disagree, and this I put it on record. Right? So in July, Brandilio and what's his name? They reissued that book on Singapore place names. Yeah, Victor and Savage. Okay, So they do have an entry on Wayang Satu. Unfortunately, they base their entry on a very, I would say, spurious source. Okay, so on the National Archives, all right, you do find an entry on at least online archives, an entry on Wayang Satu, and that is the Minister E.W. Barker's speech, all right, when they launched the Wayang Satu flyover. So in his idea, Wayang Satu was named because before the war there used to be wayangs here, or there used to be like an open air cinema. Okay, maybe that is true, but I dispute that, because, for instance, way before that even happened, go to the Arts House, go to the city map that's published of the Arts, in a replica of the city map that's published in the Arts House of 1881, and you already see Wayang Satu there and the police post there marked out. So it is definitely not because of that particular kind of wayang where you have free open air like films kind of thing. No, it's not.
The police post is the wayang.
So this is the reason. So my story. So my story. All right. I don't know the whole history, but I posit so some of the like I say, it's a bit of fiction, a bit of reality. So one of the fictional parts is my suggestion that this could possibly be a reason of how it's called. So in 1868, Bukit Timah Road itself was already formed in the 1840s. All right. So now I'm taking my branch of the 1881 map. So Wayang Satu is already well established beforehand. So obviously the police post was established before 1881. So my point is I put it as 1868, just as a top of my head, because I started with 1968, so I thought, 100 years, and then I end the story with 2068. Okay, so I get 100 years back. So now in the Fun Hill area there, up to the 70s, there was a Malay village in that area. So in my 1868, I just thought, okay, there's a Malay village in the area. There's a woman, and she's breastfeeding, and she's she's complaining in her mind. Why are they closing that section of the crossroads? And why are they going to build a police post there? And then now we can't play. We can't have our monthly wayang being played there. Wayang village being played there. So that's how I kind of suggest how that can be. Other thoughts, questions?
But you raise it with the historians issue with
No, I haven't, because I'm not at them yet. Well, if there's nothing.
When are you calling for Balik Kampung 3?
Like in the next week or so.
Why do you think there's such interest in volumes like this coming from the past?
Well, I guess to some degree, it's part of the overall Singapore trend right now, the nostalgia trend, the fight against, Bukit Brown being, taken over by traffic and the move to save Queenstown. So, and, Tiong Bahru becoming hip all of a sudden, all this retroization. But I think it's resonating with people for the sheer fact of the matter that, with the talking in the stories, they're talking about places of Singapore that hopefully people recognize, and and hopefully the writers have captured some essence that people will hold dear, especially people who are living in the area.
No, my question is more whether the direction Balik Kampung is going, or even from the start, was it meant to be a project? I don't know what the reason was. I just submitted and then it was said. Is it supposed to help people remember places, so it is a part of the preservation or something that is going to disappear anyway, or is already lost, or is it supposed to contribute to make people aware of the need to preserve, to give people a stronger historical sense of places, to make people a bit more historical? You know what I mean? There's two dimensions here. Because for me, I feel, there's a state endorsed version, which I'm assuming they are not part of it, which is like there is a need to preserve places, right? Memories. And they do this in a very electronic way. We preserve all this, but never mind, meanwhile, at the same time, we're destroying all these things. And after a while, you kind of realize, hey, they're not really two different sides or two different sides. They're actually the same side. The destroying actually helps with the remembering and vice versa. So it's in a very, very basic way, a way of contributing to further destruction. So I'm not sure. I'm thinking that you are against this. You're more towards making people aware of.
Okay, so there is that archival aspect to it, but I also wanted people to really express what they feel about a certain space and their thoughts about that certain space, whether it's positive or negative. So for instance, Tanya's perception of Ang Mo Kio is very colored by her living there and growing up there in not very positive circumstances. But other people have had more positive experiences, but still it is for want of a better word, like a photograph of the writer's impressions of that space in a particular period, and which I think, as far as possible, should be captured, not just for collective memory's sake, but also because it is, like I was saying to you, you are drawing from a very deep part of yourself that you held dear, or at least you lived with. And like I said, for me, in a lot of all the work that I've done so far, the strongest work often comes from personal material. And then if you want to also, but also there's a reaction also which I think is most clearly expressed in the original Balik Kampung preface that I wrote. In Singapore, all these new buildings, right? So there's the new downtown Marina area and all that. I went and visited the Art Science Museum, walked around Marina Bay Sands. This is not my town. Fair enough, it's supposedly for everybody's public consumption, but really, this is not the town that I grew up in, or I walked around in as a young person. And the likelihood of me trying to make that new part of town, my space, is going to be very low, because I have no cause to go there. I don't gamble. Yeah, unless I want to see something at the Art Science Museum, why would I go to the Marina Bay Sands, area and hang out there? So, in a sense, you could say it's a protest, also, because I want to say that my sense of home is just as valid as this manufactured sense of home.
There was a time when public spaces actually still felt owned by Singaporeans.
Yeah.
People still remember, like, for example, National Library, National Theatre, all these places that long gone very fondly, even though they're supposed to be public places. But now the new public spaces are not really, in many ways, fondly embraced. They're public in a different sense. Yeah.
I would challenge that. I don't know. Like we just attended World Price's new production Jack and the Beast by the National Library of the Drama Centre, and it's a very new building. It's definitely doesn't have the same sort of charm as the old National Library, but that was so beautifully Singaporean. Like we walked into that space, it was just I could see the creation of new memories there. I could see myself continuing that sort of conversation with the city. I share a more optimistic, I guess, view of development than most.
I have to echo that because I agree with the last point that your point of view, your memory of that place is invalid as the manufacturer, as per so on and so forth. But I don't think that your sense of place is not manufactured as well. Everything that we recall from the 1960s, 50s, 40s is built on someone else's past, Balik Kampung, whatever it was. It's all built. Our country is a made-up country, more or less. And it's a bit spurious to dispute future manufacturing when actually our current existence is actually just manufacturing has been there for 30 more years.
No, but that's one of the points that I'm trying to indicate also in Wayang Satu, because this constant reinvention has been happening literally since the 1800s. Yeah, since once Raffles said, oh, this is a wonderful place to make a base from. So, but what I'm just against is that, I guess, is that yes, fair enough. New spaces need time for people to make it their own. But the point also, I guess a lot of people are protesting is the change is so fast that barely have we made it our own, it's gone. Yeah.
There's also a difference between reinventing something which is natural in a way, in a very strange way of the word, and owning the place. I think we have to draw a distinction. I mean, we will always be making new spaces, but whether those new spaces will get owned is a big question. Maybe with time it will, right? And if we now believe in a place, it will. As you highlighted, Drama Center, right, the new one, can for a generation that never experienced the old Drama Center to feel like this is the place we can believe. But for people who have experienced the old Drama Center, I think they have to be made to believe somehow, brought to believe that this new place can still have the same spirit. So every new change require you to do this double effort, bringing young people to believe, bringing old people to also believe. And if you change again before you can even get this, then you're tripling the effort. Each time you change before you do something, you make it even more difficult for people to start owning it.
It's difficult to talk about the whole concept of Balik and Kampung without this becoming a social community, right? So in the submissions that you got, were there any overtly works of overt social criticism? Because in other places I can imagine, yes, people would write with that in mind.
So far it's all implicit, and actually the ones that I rejected were more because literally they didn't make sense. They needed either they were new writers or it was bad writing kind of thing. So it's not so much I rejected things in terms of themes. If anyone here is interested in thinking of one to submit for Balik Kampung, please let me know. Give me your email and I'll write to you.
Now it serves me to say that books are available.